Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be reading in our Night Sky Almanac for 2022. We're going to look at what the night sky in November is going to look like, and then we're going to read through this big book here about the constellations. So let's just dive right in. I'm filming a little earlier than usual, so there might be a few more cars outside than normal, but anyway, November events. November means colder weather, but it also marks the return of the winter constellations and what is likely the most well-known constellation, Orion. The winter sky has a lot to offer if you're willing to brave the chillier nights. There's the multitude of objects in Orion as well as those in nearby Taurus and Auriga. The cooler nights also mean that the sky seems less turbulent, allowing the colors of the many different stars to pop. There are two meteor shower peaks this month, the Southern Taurids and the Northern Taurids. The Southern Taurid meteor shower peaks on November 5th, with the Northern Taurids peaking a few days later on November 11th. With the two peaks occurring so close together, there's a greater chance to see meteors that week. But that's not all when it comes to meteors. On the night of November 17th to 18th, we get the peak of the Leonid meteor shower, which produces a ZHR of roughly 15, so this is a particularly good month to bundle up and look skyward. Awesome. I do realize that I see more meteors in the winter time than in any other time of the year, unless it's like a summertime meteor shower I'm purposefully, going out, but I feel like I see more chance ones in the winter time. Let's see what the moon's doing this month. On November 1st, the moon will be roughly 4 degrees from Saturn in the southern sky, and on November 4th it will be about 2 degrees from Jupiter. The full moon will swing by the Pleiades and the Hyades on November 8th, and then again on November 9th. And of course, the moon can't miss out on visiting Mars. On November 11th, the pair will be roughly 3 degrees apart. There will be a total lunar eclipse in the early hours of November 8th, which will be visible either in part or in its entirety across North America. Now that's interesting. Lunar eclipses are so beautiful. A new moon occurs on November 23rd. Apogee falls on November 14th and perigee falls on November 26th. Awesome. Exciting month. Let's see what the stars will look like in the southern half of the sky. This month, you'll find Jupiter sitting between Cetus, the whale, and Pisces, the fishes. Saturn is in Capricornus, the sea goat, though it begins to set earlier as the month progresses. Mars is beginning to rise higher in the sky, between the horns of Taurus, the bull. If you're wondering what happened to Venus and Mercury, they're far too close to the sun to be seen. Well, that's too bad. Venus has been very beautiful this year, but I'm ready to see Mars. So let's see, we have Jupiter sitting between Cetus the whale and Pisces the fishes. Saturn is over by Capricornus, right here. And then Mars is over by Taurus. Boom. And there's Mars. Awesome. Let's see what else. One of the smaller but fairly obvious constellations is Triangulum, the triangle, which can be found amid the constellations Perseus, Andromeda, Pisces, and Aries the ram. Triangulum is home to one of the most famous galaxies, the Triangulum Galaxy, or Messier 33. Interestingly, the galaxy is believed to have interacted with the Andromeda Galaxy, Messier 31, which can be found nearby in the constellation Andromeda, billions of years ago, and is now moving toward it. That is a gorgeous galaxy, isn't it? The Triangulum Galaxy. Let's see where it is in the sky. So we have Triangulum up here, little triangle. There's the Triangulum Galaxy, and it's around Perseus, Andromeda. I'm flipped backwards. Andromeda. I'm like Andromeda, she's down here. Aries, who will be over here, right? Aries, there he is. I was like, wait, there's Taurus, where's Aries? And that was it. And just the galaxies, and the Andromeda Galaxy, which is even more beautiful than this one, because you can see it with the naked eye sometimes. It's great. Let's see what else. In the west, you will find Aquarius the Water Bearer, where you can see the globular cluster Messier 2 before it sets at the month's end. Let's see that. There's Aquarius, there's Messier 2. And then, this is a great time to check out two of the most famous open star clusters of the winter sky, the Hyades, or Melotte 25, and the Pleiades, Messier 45, which are found in Taurus. The reddish star Aldebaran is the brightest star in Taurus. It is easily visible even in light-polluted skies above cities. Yeah, I have noticed that the typical bright stars, but not too bright, have been so bright. So there's the Pleiades, which are also very beautiful to see. The Hyades are just nearby. I'll have to look out for them. With Aldebaran right there. And let's see what else. The famous Orion the Hunter will rise in the east as the night progresses, along with Gemini, the twins. There he is, very distinct with his belt. And there's the twins over there. Let's check out the northern sky. The bowl of the Big Dipper in Ursa Major, the Great Bear, is now very low on the horizon in the north, and Ursa Minor, the Little Bear, hangs upside down due north. So there's north. So here's Ursa Major, Ursa Minor. You can see the Big Dipper in there. What else? Draco, the dragon, winds between the two bears and leads to Hercules, which is now beginning to sink lower in the northwest. There's big Draco the dragon. And there goes Hercules, falling down past the horizon. Cassiopeia's distinctive W hangs almost upside down between Cepheus and Perseus. This is another good opportunity to enjoy the Garnet Star in Cepheus. The constellation is also home to the Elephant's Trunk Nebula, or C1396, which is a dense region of dust and gas that is busy forming new stars. It's located roughly 2,400 light years from Earth. It's also a favorite target of astrophotographers. That's a lot. Let's find Queen Cassiopeia right here, her W. There's Cepheus, her husband, the little house. And Perseus, her son-in-law. And what else? The Garnet Star in Cepheus. Oh, look at that. The Elephant's Trunk Nebula, the Garnet Star. That's pretty neat. Let's see what else. And if you're looking for the Andromeda Galaxy, Messier 31, it's almost right at the zenith. The placement of Cassiopeia, Cepheus, and Perseus provides some excellent opportunities to find not only the Andromeda Galaxy, but star clusters as well, including the double cluster, NGC 869 and NGC 844. Be sure to take out your binoculars for a great view. So here's what those two objects look like out in the stars. It's really beautiful. And then Andromeda Galaxy is going to be up right by the zenith, so directly up. You just have to look straight up at the sky and you can see the Andromeda Galaxy. And where are these objects? They are double cluster NGC 869. Do you see the double cluster right here? That's why I couldn't find them. It just says double cluster next to Cassiopeia. Lastly, Auriga has now risen higher in the northeast, along with the two heads of Gemini, the twins, Castor and Pollux. So let's see if we're flipped over. So there's Orion, there's the twins, Gemini, Castor and Pollux, and who else? Auriga, with bright Capello, who's been so bright this year. All the big bright stars have been so incredibly bright. It's awesome. But if you're wondering why I'm referring to these constellations as like husband and wife, son-in-law, let's read the stories about these constellations so you can know more about them. Let me set this down very carefully. There we go. Okay. And let me carefully slide the book around. Let's start off with Cepheus. The constellation Cepheus is named after a mythical king, the husband of Queen Cassiopeia. In Greek mythology, King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia were told by an oracle that they must sacrifice their daughter, Princess Andromeda, to a sea monster to stop it from destroying their coastline. In a dramatic rescue, Andromeda was saved from the monster's jaws by the warrior Perseus. All the characters from this myth have constellations named after them. The stars of Cepheus form the shape like a house with a pointed roof. The most famous stars is Delta Cephei. And here we have Ursa Minor. This constellation represents a small bear with a long tail. At the tip of its tail lies the pole star called Polaris, which is the brightest star in the constellation. Ursa Minor is sometimes termed the Little Dipper because its main stars form a shape that looks like a smaller version of the Big Dipper in the constellation Ursa Major. It was one of the original constellations known to the ancient Greeks. Next is, there we go, Draco. Draco is a constellation representing a dragon. In Greek mythology, this was the dragon slain by the warrior Hercules, who is represented by a neighboring constellation. The dragon's head is formed by 4 stars near the border with Hercules. The ancient Greeks visualized Hercules with 1 foot on the dragon's head. From the head, its body curls like a snake around the sky between Ursa Minor and Ursa Major. Draco's brightest star, Etemen, lies in the dragon's head. And next is Cassiopeia, a mythical queen from ancient Greece, the wife of King Cepheus and the mother of Princess Andromeda, inspired the name of this constellation. On star maps, she is depicted sitting in a chair and combing her hair. In the sky, the main stars of Cassiopeia form a W shape, which is easy to recognize but does not really look much like a person sitting in a chair. Cassiopeia contains several interesting clusters of stars. The brightest of them can be seen with binoculars and small telescopes. Next, we have, here we go, Camelopardalis. Dutch astronomer Petrus Plancius devised this strangely named constellation in 1612. It represents a giraffe. The Greeks called giraffes camel leopards because of their long necks and spotted bodies, which is where Camelopardalis gets its name. It is difficult to spot, because it contains only faint stars. Another animal we have is lynx. This is a faint constellation squeezed in between the constellations Ursa Major and Auriga. Polish astronomer Johannes Hevelius created it in 1687. Hevelius had very sharp eyesight, and he named the constellation Lynx because, he said, you will have to be lynx-eyed to see it. It has a number of interesting double and triple stars, which can be studied with a small telescope. And here's Auriga. The constellation Auriga is easy to find because it contains the star Capella, one of the brightest stars in the entire sky. To the ancient Greeks, the constellation represented a charioteer carrying a goat and 2 baby goats on his arm. Capella was the goat, and the 2 fainter stars were the babies. Among the objects of interest in Auriga is a row of 3 star clusters, M36, M37, and M38, all visible through binoculars. The star that once marked the charioteer's right foot has now been transferred to Taurus the bull, which lies to the south. Next we have the iconic Ursa Major. This large constellation's name is Latin for the Great Bear, which it represents. 7 of its brightest stars form a saucepan shape, popularly known as the Big Dipper, which is one of the best known features in the entire sky. The 2 stars in the bowl of the saucepan farthest from the handle, called Merak and Dubi, are known as the pointers because they point toward the pole star Polaris. The curving handle of the saucepan points toward the brightest star Arcturus in the nearby constellation Boötes. Next we have Canis Venatici. This constellation was named after a pair of hunting dogs by Polish astronomer Johannes Hevelius in 1687. There are only 2 stars of any note in the constellation, but it also contains many interesting galaxies. Most famous of these is the Whirlpool Galaxy. This can be seen through binoculars as a faint patch of light, but a large telescope is needed to make out its spiral shape. Another object of note is the globular star cluster M3 near the constellation's southern border. Yeah, it's just these 2 stars. Little dog. Next is Boötes. Boötes represents a man herding the great bear around the pole. He is sometimes referred to as the herdsman or bear driver. The constellation contains Arcturus, the brightest star in the northern half of the sky. It's a giant star and looks pale orange to the eye. Awesome. Bear driver in Greek. I like it. Hercules. The constellation is named after Hercules, the strong man of Greek mythology. In star charts, he is often depicted brandishing a club and with one foot on the head of Draco the dragon, which he killed in a fight. The stars of Hercules are not particularly bright, so the constellation can be difficult to find. Its most noticeable feature is a squashed square of 4 stars known as the keystone, which marks the body of Hercules. On one side of the keystone lies the globular cluster M13. Then up here we have, carefully, there we go, just to make sure you can see it, Lyra. The constellation Lyra represents a small harp known to the Greeks as a lyre. In mythology, it was the instrument played by the musician Orpheus. Lyra is easy to spot because it contains Vega, the 5th brightest star in the entire sky, 25 light years away. Vega forms one corner of the summer triangle, a triangle formed by bright stars in 3 different constellations. Let's see what else. Next is a good one. Cygnus. The ancient Greeks visualized Cygnus as a swan flying along the Milky Way. Its brightest star, Deneb, marks its tail, while the star Albireo is its beak. In mythology, the swan was the disguise used by the god Zeus when he visited Queen Leda of Sparta. The overall shape of the constellation resembles a large cross, so it is sometimes known as the Northern Cross. One of the most exciting objects in Cygnus lies in the swan's neck, a black hole called Cygnus X1. The black hole itself cannot be seen from Earth, obviously, but satellites in space have detected X-rays from hot gas falling into it from a nearby star. Yeah, you can't really see a black hole from anywhere. That's kind of the point. Next is Andromeda. This constellation is named after a princess of Greek mythology who was chained to a rock by her parents, King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia, as a sacrifice to a sea monster. Fortunately, she was rescued in the nick of time by the hero Perseus, who lies next to her in the sky. Andromeda's head is marked by the star known as Alpheratz. In recent times, the star was shared with the constellation Pegasus. Next we have Lacerta. This small figure represents a lizard scuttling between Andromeda and Cygnus. It was devised in 1687 by the Polish astronomer, you guessed it, Johannes Hevelius, from some faint stars that had not previously been part of any constellation. Of particular note is an object called Bia Lacertae. Once thought to be an unusual variable star, it is now known to be the core of an active galaxy. The core of an active galaxy. And here's Triangulum. To the ancient Greeks, this small triangular constellation just south of Andromeda represented either the delta of the Nile River or the island of Sicily. Its main feature is M33, a spiral galaxy faintly visible through binoculars. M33 lies nearly 3 million light years away and is the 3rd largest member of our local group of galaxies. Awesome. Let's see who's next. It is the hero Perseus. The constellation Perseus is named after a hero of Greek mythology who was sent to cut off the head of Medusa, an evil character known as a Gorgon. In the sky, Perseus is seen holding his sword aloft in his right hand, with the head of Medusa in her left. The head is marked by the variable star Algol. Then we have Aries. Aries represents a ram with a golden fleece in Greek mythology. According to legend, Jason and the Argonauts made an epic voyage from Greece to the Black Sea to find the fleece and bring it back. The constellation's most obvious feature is a crooked line of 3 stars south of Triangulum. The most southerly and faintest of these stars, Missartim, is a double star that's easily divided by small telescopes. Next is Cancer. Bring it down a little more. This constellation represents a crab that had a minor role in Greek mythology. According to the story, when Hercules was fighting the multi-headed Hydra, the crab bit him but was then crushed underfoot. Cancer is the faintest of the 12 constellations of the zodiac. Near its center is a large, hazy star cluster with several alternative names: the Beehive, Praesepe, the Manger, or simply M44. Next is Taurus. Leave your zodiac constellation in the comments. I'm a Leo. Taurus the bull is one of the most magnificent and interesting constellations in the sky. In Greek mythology, the god Zeus turned himself into a bull to carry off Princess Europa to the island of Crete. The brightest star in the constellation is Aldebaran, a red giant that marks the glinting eye of the bull. The star at the tip of the bull's right horn, Anath or El Nath, was once shared with Auriga to the north. Next is Gemini. Gemini represents the mythical twins Castor and Pollux. The 2 brightest stars in the constellation are named after the twins and mark their heads. A small telescope shows that Castor is a double star. These 2 stars orbit each other every 500 years or so. Larger telescopes show a fainter red dwarf star near them. Special instruments have revealed that each of these 3 stars is itself a close double, making Castor a family of 6 stars, all linked by gravity. Next is Leo Minor. This small constellation represents a lion cub. Polish astronomer Johannes Hevelius introduced it in 1687. This guy had a hobby, didn't he? Leo Minor contains very few objects of interest. The star R Leonis Minoris is a red giant. Its brightness varies at regular intervals. It can be seen with binoculars at its brightest, but is not visible even through small telescopes at its dimmest. Next is Coma Berenices. This is a faint but interesting constellation near the tail of Leo the lion. The ancient Greeks imagined it as the hair of Queen Berenice of Egypt. She cut off her hair to thank the gods after her husband returned safely from fighting a war in Asia. Dozens of faint stars form a wedge-shaped group called the Coma star cluster, easily seen with binoculars. I thought it was supposed to be Berenice's comb. It's just apparently her hair. Interesting. I thought that's why it was called that. Next is Leo, my constellation. It's a good one. This is one of the few constellations that really looks like what it's supposed to represent, in this case a crouching lion. In Greek mythology, it was said to be the lion slain by the warrior Hercules as one of his 12 labors. An arc of stars called the sickle, marked here in purple, little coat hanger, I lost my spot, forms the lion's head and chest. Leo's brightest star, Regulus, lies at the base of the sickle. One of the stars in the sickle algebra can be seen as a double star through small telescopes. I'm really struggling with the English, but not the Greek and Latin, apparently, just the English. Next is Virgo. Virgo is the second largest constellation. In Greek mythology, it represented both the goddess of justice and the goddess of agriculture. The main stars of Virgo form a lazy Y shape. The constellation's brightest star, Spica, is at the base of the Y. The star Porrima, in the middle of the Y, is a double star divisible with a small telescope. In the bowl of the Y is the Virgo cluster, a cluster of more than 1,000 galaxies, about 55 million light years away. Next is Libra. The scales of justice are represented by Libra and are held by the goddess of justice, Virgo, who lies next to Libra in the sky. Libra stars represented the claws of the scorpion Scorpius until Roman times. But next is not Scorpius, it's going to be Serpens. The constellation Serpens represents a large snake being held by the man in the constellation Ophiuchus. The head of the snake lies on one side of Ophiuchus, the tail on the other. This is the only example of a constellation being split into two. However, the two halves count as only one constellation. Near the neck of the snake lies M5, one of the best globular clusters in the northern sky, just visible through binoculars. Binoculars will also show an open cluster called IC4756 near the snake's tail. And next we have Corona Borealis. Shaped like a horseshoe, this constellation represents the jeweled crown worn by Princess Ariadne of Crete when she married the god Dionysus. Within the arc of the crown lies a most unusual variable star, R Coronae Borealis. This is a yellow supergiant that suddenly drops in brightness every few years. A really easy one to spot. Next, let's talk about Ophiuchus, who I really just cannot say because I've said Ophiuchus my whole life and I found out that wasn't it, and now I just cannot say it. So I think it's Ophiuchus. I think. This constellation represents the god of medicine. In the sky, he's depicted holding a large snake, the constellation Serpens. Ophiuchus contains several globular clusters that can be seen with binoculars and small telescopes. The brightest of them are M10 and M12. Next is Scutum. Just scoot him over. Scutum the shield. This small constellation represents a shield. It was created in the late 17th century by, you guessed it, Polish astronomer Johannes Hevelius. One of the brightest parts of the Milky Way lies in the northern half of this constellation and is known as the Scutum star cloud. Near the border with the constellation Aquila is M11, a star cluster often called the Wild Duck Cluster, because its shape resembles a flock of birds in flight. And then we have Sagitta. The third smallest constellation in the sky, Sagitta represents an arrow. It was one of the original constellations known to the ancient Greeks, who said that the arrow was shot either by Hercules, who lies next to it, or by one of the gods. Although its stars are faint, it is quite easy to recognize. Right, next we have Aquila. Aquila represents a flying eagle, one of the disguises that was said in mythology to have been adopted by the Greek god Zeus. Its main star is Altair, which marks one corner of the Summer Triangle, a famous triangle made of bright stars from different constellations. The other two stars of the triangle are Vega in Lyra and Deneb in Cygnus. The most interesting feature in Aquila is Eta Aquilae, one of the brightest examples of the type of variable star known as a Cepheid. Let's look at Vulpecula. You guessed it, Polish astronomer Johannes Hevelius named this faint constellation in the late 17th century. It represents a fox. An attractive object for binoculars is a group of stars called the coat hanger, shaped like a bar with a hook on top. Now hold on, the coat hanger is in Leo, you can't just steal it like that. Next is Delphinus, one of the few not named by Johannes Hevelius. Check this out, these star names, right? You're like, what was that, Arabic? Is that Russian? Look at this. This attractive constellation represents a dolphin. In mythology, this was the dolphin that rescued the Greek musician Orion when he jumped overboard from a ship to escape a band of robbers. The constellation's two brightest stars bear the odd names Suolosin and Rotanev. Read backwards, they spell out Nicholas Venator, the name of the Italian astronomer who's thought to have named them after himself. Can you believe that? But I mean, admit it, you would do it too. Next is Equus. Equus is the second smallest constellation in the sky, representing the head of a foal. It lies next to the large flying horse Pegasus, and was one of the constellations known to the ancient Greeks. There is little of interest in it apart from a double star, Catalpha, that can easily be divided with binoculars. And then let's talk about Pegasus. This large constellation of the northern sky represents a flying horse in Greek mythology. Its most noticeable feature is a pattern called the Great Square, formed by 4 stars that outline the horse's body. Another easy one to spot. However, only 3 stars of the square actually belong to Pegasus. The 4th is over the border in Andromeda, although in the past it was shared by the 2 constellations. The square is so large that 30 full moons placed side by side could fit inside it. The horse's nose is marked by the star Enith. Next is Aquarius. The constellation Aquarius represents a young man pouring water from a jar. The jar is represented by a little group of stars around Zeta Aquarii. A string of fainter stars cascading southward represents the flow of water. In the north of the constellation lies the globular cluster M2, visible as a faint patch through binoculars. 2 famous planetary nebulas, or remains of dying stars, can be found in Aquarius with telescopes. Careful. Next is Pisces. Pisces represents 2 fish with their tails tied together by ribbons. The star Alresca marks the knot joining the 2 ribbons. The constellation depicts the Greek myth in which Aphrodite and her son Eros turn themselves into fish to escape from a monster Typhon. A loop of 7 stars called the circlet marks the body of one of the fish. Pisces includes M74, a beautiful face-on spiral galaxy just visible through small telescopes. And here's Cetus. Cetus, the sea monster, is the 4th largest constellation. In Greek mythology, Andromeda was chained to a rock as a sacrifice to the monster, but Perseus saved her. In the neck of Cetus lies Mira, a famous variable star. When at its brightest, Mira is easily visible to the naked eye, but it fades from view for months at a time. Next is Canis Major. The constellation Canis Major and nearby Canis Minor represent the dogs of Orion. Canis Major contains the brightest star of the night sky, Sirius, which lies 8.6 light-years away. South of Sirius is the star cluster M41, which is just visible to the naked eye under clear, dark skies. It is a beautiful sight through binoculars. And then, Canis Minor. Canis Minor is the smaller of the 2 dogs of Orion. Its main star, Procyon, is the 8th brightest in the sky. Procyon forms a large triangle with the other dog star, Sirius and Canis Major, and Betelgeuse and Orion. Both Procyon and Sirius are orbited by white dwarf stars, but these companions can be seen only with large telescopes. There's little else of interest in this constellation. Poor little dog. And here is the dog's master, Orion, which is a very famous, recognizable constellation. This constellation represents a giant hunter of Greek mythology. In the sky, he is depicted raising his club and shield against Taurus the bull, the constellation next to him. The bright star Betelgeuse marks Orion's right shoulder, and Rigel is his left foot. Betelgeuse is a red supergiant, which varies slightly in brightness, while Rigel, another supergiant star, is hotter and bluer. One feature that makes Orion easy to identify is the line of 3 stars that mark his belt. From the belt hangs his sword, which contains one of the treasures of the night sky, the Orion Nebula. Next is Monoceros, or a unicorn. Fancy name for a unicorn. This constellation represents a unicorn, the mythical beast with a single horn. Dutch astronomer and mapmaker Petrus Plancius introduced it in the early 17th century in a gap between Greek constellations. One feature of interest is Beta Monocerotis, which is an excellent triple star for small telescopes. Three attractive star clusters for binoculars or small telescopes are M50, NGC 2244, and NGC 2264. And next is Hydra. This is the largest constellation of all, stretching more than a quarter of the way around the sky. In Greek mythology, Hydra was a monster with many heads. Although in the sky it has only one head, represented by a loop of 5 stars. Its brightest star is called Alphard, meaning the solitary one, since it lies in a fairly blank area of sky. M48, near the border with Monoceros, is a star cluster visible through binoculars and small telescopes. Next we have Antlia. Getting into the interesting ones now. This is a small, faint southern constellation invented in the 1750s by the French astronomer Nicolas Louis de Lacaille. Its name, which means pump, commemorates the invention of a kind of air pump. The constellation's most impressive feature is a spiral galaxy called NGC 2997. This is too faint to see with small telescopes, but shows up beautifully in photographs, which reveal clouds of pink gas dotted along its arms. And here is Sextans, a faint constellation that was invented in the late 17th century by Polish astronomer Johannes Avelius. Sextans represents an instrument called a sextant, which was used for measuring star positions. Sextans contains the Spindle Galaxy, NGC 3115, a galaxy several times larger than her own Milky Way. Wow. And here is Crater. The word crater is Latin for cup, and this constellation represents the cup of the Greek god Apollo. In Greek mythology, Apollo sent a crow to fetch water in the cup. The greedy bird was late because it stopped to eat figs. It blamed the delay on a snake, but Apollo realized what had happened and punished the crow for lying by placing it in the sky along with the cup and the snake. Crater contains no major objects of interest for users of small telescopes. And then over here is Corvus. Corvus represents a crow that was sent to fetch water in a cup by the god Apollo. It lies next to Crater, which represents the cup. Both lie on the back of Hydra, the water snake. The constellation's most amazing feature is a pair of colliding galaxies called the antennae, NGC 4038 and 4039. Large telescopes reveal long streamers of gas and stars stretching away from the galaxies like an antennae or the feelers of an insect. Let's see what's next. It is Centaurus. Centaurs were mythical creatures of ancient Greece, half man and half horse. This constellation represents a centaur called Chiron, who taught the children of the Greek gods. Small telescopes show that its brightest star, Alpha Centauri, is a double star. There's also a third star, a red dwarf called Proxima Centauri, which is the closest star to the Sun at 4.2 light years away. Here is Crux, popularly known as the Southern Cross. This is the smallest of all the 88 constellations. Its brightest star, a crux, is a double star that is easily separated by small telescopes. Near Bicrux lies NGC 4755, popularly known as the Jewel Box, a beautiful cluster of stars easily visible through binoculars and small telescopes. A dark cloud of dust called the Coal-Sack Nebula can be seen against the bright Milky Way background. And here's Lupus. This constellation represents a wolf. Ancient Greek astronomers imagined it as being held on a spear by Centaurus, the centaur. Lupus contains several interesting double stars. In the southern part of the constellation lies a star cluster with the catalog number NGC 5822. And here is Sagittarius. Little teapot there. Can you see the teapot? Sagittarius. This constellation represents an archer drawing his bow and is depicted as a centaur. The 8 main stars of Sagittarius form a shape known as the teapot. Near the lid of the teapot lies M22, a large globular cluster easily visible through binoculars. There are several fine nebulas in Sagittarius, including the Trifid Nebula M20. One of my favorite ones to find, it's Scorpius. This constellation represents the scorpion that stung Orion to death in a story from Greek mythology. At the scorpion's heart lies Antares, a red supergiant, hundreds of times larger than the sun. Next to Antares is M4, a large globular cluster visible through binoculars. At the end of the scorpion's curling tail is a large star cluster, M7, just visible to the naked eye as a brighter spot in the Milky Way. Near it is M6, smaller and best seen through small telescopes. Another beautiful star cluster for binoculars is NGC 6231. Let's see what's next. It's Capricornus. This constellation is shown as a goat with the tail of a fish. It is said to represent the Greek god Pan, who had the horns and legs of a goat. He grew the fish tail when he jumped into a river to escape a monster called Typhon. A feature of interest is Algety, a wide double star, which is easily divided with binoculars or even good eyesight. Dabe is another double, but needs binoculars or a small telescope to divide. And here is Microscopium. This faint constellation of the southern sky was invented in the 1750s by the French astronomer Nicolas Louis de Lacaille, who studied the southern stars from the Cape of Good Hope in southern Africa. Lacaille invented many new constellations representing scientific instruments, in this case a microscope. Yeah, there's a lot more, but we're going to look at Pisces Austrinus. To the ancient Greeks, this constellation represented a large fish drinking water flowing from a jar held by Aquarius to its north. Its brightest star is Fomalhaut, which lies 25 light years away. The name Fomalhaut comes from Arabic and means fish's mouth. And here is Sculptor. Invented in the 1750s by the French astronomer Nicolas Louis de Lacaille. These guys have got hobbies, don't they? This constellation represents a sculptor's studio. Its stars are faint, but it contains a number of interesting galaxies. Most impressive of these is NGC 253, a spiral galaxy 13 million light years away, seen nearly edge-on and just visible in small telescopes. NGC 55 is another edge-on spiral. Dust clouds and areas of star formation make it look patchy, and it can be seen clearly only with larger telescopes. Here is Fornax. French astronomer Nicolas Louis de Lacaille came up with this constellation in the 1750s. It represents a furnace used for chemical experiments. On its border lies the Fornax cluster of galaxies, which is located about 65 million light years away. Ooh, there's a big boom outside. Did you hear that? And then here's Calum. Calum is another of these small, faint constellations of the southern sky that were invented in the 1750s by French astronomer Nicolas Louis de Lacaille. It represents a chisel used by engravers. Calum is squeezed into the gap between Eridanus and Columba. There is little in the constellation of interest to users of binoculars and small telescopes. It's just that. Here's Eridanus. To the ancient Greeks, this large constellation represented a river, either the Nile in Egypt or the Po in Italy. In the sky, it meanders from the left foot of Orion deep into the southern sky. Its brightest star is Arcanar, and at the southern end of the river. Next we have Lepus. Lepus represents a hare scampering under the feet of the hunter Orion. It was one of the constellations known to the ancient Greeks. The name of its brightest star, Arneb, means hare in Arabic. An interesting feature in this constellation is Gamma Leporis, an attractive double star that can be divided with binoculars. I bit my tongue. Talking too fast. Another object of interest is NGC 2017, a small group of stars, the brightest of which can be seen through small telescopes. Here's Columba. This constellation was devised in 1592 by the Dutch astronomer Petrus Plancius, using stars between Lepus and Canis Major that were not part of any Greek constellation. It is said to represent the dove that Noah sent from the biblical ark to find dry land. Columba's brightest star is called Phact, from the Arabic meaning ring dove. Next is Pyxis. French astronomer Nicolas Louis de Lacaille devised this faint southern constellation in the 1750s during his survey of the southern sky. Pyxis depicts a magnetic compass as used on ships. The constellation's most remarkable star is T Pyxidus, a recurrent nova, a kind of star that brightens from time to time. It has been said to flare up 6 times since 1890. Further outbursts could occur at any time. And here's good old Puppis. Puppis was once part of a much larger Greek constellation called Argo Navis, the ship of Jason and the Argonauts. It depicted the ship's stern. Puppis lies in a rich part of the Milky Way and contains many bright star clusters. M46 and M47 lie side by side and create a brighter patch in the Milky Way. NGC 2451 and NGC 2477 are 2 more clusters that lie close together. Binoculars give a good view of them both. And here is Vela. Vela represents the sails of Argo Navis, the ship of Jason and the Argonauts. Argo Navis was a large Greek constellation that was split into 3 smaller parts. The other 2 parts are Puppis and Carina. 2 stars of Vela combine with a pair of stars in Carina to form the False Cross, sometimes mistaken for the real Southern Cross. Around another star is a large cluster called IC 2391, bright enough to be visible to the naked eye. And here's Carina. Carina is one of the 3 parts into which the large Greek constellation of Argo Navis, the ship of Jason and the Argonauts, was split. It depicts the ship's keel or hull. This constellation contains the 2nd brightest star in the night sky, Canopus. A pair of stars in Carina form half of the False Cross, completed by 2 stars in Vela. Next we have Musca. This constellation of the southern sky was invented at the end of the 16th century by Dutch seafarers. It represents a fly. Part of the dark Coalsack Nebula spills into Musca from Crux, which lies to the north. Of note is NGC 4833, a globular cluster that can be seen through binoculars and small telescopes. Here's Cercinus. This small southern constellation was created in the 1750s by French astronomer Nicolas Louis de Lacaille. Most of his constellations represented instruments from science and the arts. He visualized Cercinus as the dividing compass used by the surveyors and navigators. Its brightest star is a double. Over here we have Norma. Norma was introduced in the 1750s by the French astronomer Nicolas Louis de Lacaille. It represents a set square as used by draftsmen and builders. Objects of note include the star Gamma Normae, which consists of a wide pair of unrelated stars, both separately visible to the naked eye, and NGC 6087, a large rich star cluster visible through binoculars. Here we have Triangulum Astral. At the end of the 16th century, Dutch explorers who sailed to the East Indies created a dozen new constellations among the southern stars. The smallest of them was Triangulum Austral, the southern triangle. It is smaller than the northern triangle, Triangulum, but its stars are brighter. The main object of interest in Triangulum Austral is the star cluster NGC 6025 on its northern border, visible through binoculars. Over here we have Ara. The constellation Ara was known to the ancient Greeks. To them it depicted the altar on which the gods of Mount Olympus swore an oath of loyalty before fighting the Titans, their sworn enemies. An attractive star cluster in Ara is NGC 6193. None of the stars of Ara is of particular interest. And here's Corona Australis. This small constellation lies under the feet of Sagittarius. It represents a crown or wreath, and was one of the constellations known to the ancient Greeks. Although faint, Corona Australis is fairly easy to spot because its main star is forming noticeable arc. An interesting object for small telescopes is the globular cluster NGC 6541. Here we have telescopium. Bet you know who already came up with this one. It was French astronomer Nicolas Louis de Lacaille who came up with this faint constellation in the 1750s. To commemorate the telescope, the astronomer's basic tool. The constellation has since been reduced in size. Besides a globular cluster and a wide pair of unrelated stars, which can be seen separately with binoculars or even good eyesight, there's little of note. It's just that. Next is Indus. Indus is one of the 12 southern constellations introduced at the end of the 16th century by Dutch seafarers. This constellation was visualized as a native hunter brandishing a spear. Indus has an interesting double star that can be divided by a small telescope. And next we have Grus. Grus represents a crane, a long-necked wading bird. It is one of the constellations invented in the late 16th century by Dutch seafarers. In the bird's neck lie two wide double stars. Both pairs can be divided with the naked eye. The stars in each pair are actually at different distances from us and so not related. They are just optical doubles and not true binaries. Over here is Phoenix. This constellation lies near the southern end of Eridanus. Phoenix is the largest of the 12 new constellations that were created at the end of the 16th century by Dutch explorers sailing to the East Indies. It represents the mythical bird that was said to be reborn from its own ashes every 500 years. Here is Tucana. Dutch navigators came up with this southern constellation in the late 16th century. It represents a toucan, a tropical bird with a large beak. Tucana contains the small Magellanic Cloud, a mini galaxy about 200,000 light years away from us. To the naked eye, the SMC looks like a separate part of the Milky Way. The globular clusters 47 Tucanae and NGC 362 lie on either side of the SMC, but are actually much closer to us. Here we have Hydrus. Let me see. Okay, one more page after this. Almost done, folks. Representing a sea snake, this constellation slithers between the large and small Magellanic Clouds. Hydrus was created by Dutch explorers in the 16th century. It should not be confused with Hydra, the large water snake, which has been known since ancient Greek times. Hydrus has a pair of red giants, Pi Hydrae, that look like a double star, but are unrelated and lie at different distances from us. Pi Hydrae can be seen separately through binoculars. Here is Horologium. Horologium represents a clock with a long pendulum, as used in observatories for accurate timekeeping in the days before electronic clocks. $5, you know who invented this one. It is one of the southern constellations honoring scientific and technical instruments that were introduced by the French astronomer Nicolas Louis de Lacaille in the 1750s. Horologium is faint and contains few objects of interest for small telescopes. Next is Reticulum. This small southern constellation is one of 14 invented in the 1750s by the French astronomer Nicolas Louis de Lacaille when he mapped the southern stars from the Cape of Good Hope in southern Africa. Reticulum represents the crosshairs in the eyepiece of Lacaille's telescope, which helped him to measure the positions of stars accurately. Of note is Zeta Reticuli, a pair of yellow stars that can be separated with binoculars. And here is Pictor. This is yet another constellation invented in the 1750s by the French astronomer Nicolas Louis de Lacaille. It represents an artist's easel. Pictor contains an interesting double star, Iota Pictoris, which can be easily separated through small telescopes. And this is the last page. Yep, alright. Only a few left. We have Dorado next. Dutch seafarers created this southern constellation in the late 16th century. It represents a type of tropical fish called a dorado, but is also known as the goldfish. The main feature of Dorado is the Large Magellanic Cloud, the bigger of the two companion galaxies of the Milky Way. Another point of interest is the Tarantula Nebula, NGC 2070, which appears as a hazy star. And look at that. Neat. Here's Volans. This constellation was invented in the late 16th century by Dutch explorers who sailed to the East Indies, surveying the stars of the southern sky on the way. It represents a flying fish, one of the exotic creatures they saw on their voyages. Gamma and Epsilon Volantis are double stars that can be easily distinguished by small telescopes. Here is Mensa. There you go. French astronomer Nicolas Louis de Lacaille devised this constellation in the 1750s. He measured the positions of thousands of southern stars from an observatory near the foot of Table Mountain at the Cape of Good Hope, South Africa. This constellation was named Mensa, which means table in Latin, to celebrate the mountain. Mensa contains part of the Large Magellanic Cloud. All of Mensa's stars are faint, and none of them is of interest for users of small telescopes. Here's Chameleon. Chameleon is a small southern constellation invented in the late 16th century. It is named after the lizard that can change its skin color to match its surroundings. Next to it lies Musca the fly, which is appropriate because chameleons eat flies. Of interest is Delta Chameleontis, a wide double star that is easily seen with binoculars. Here is Apis. Dutch explorers sailing to the East Indies in the late 16th century devised Apis. This constellation represents a bird of paradise, a kind of bird known for its beautiful plumage, which in the past was used to decorate hats and other items of clothing. Delta Apotis is a wide pair of unrelated red giant stars, which can be seen separately with the naked eye or in binoculars. And here we have Pavo. Pavo represents a peacock, a bird with a glorious fan-like tail. It's one of the 12 southern constellations introduced by the Dutch seafarers at the end of the 16th century. Items of note include NGC 6752, a large and bright globular cluster, easily visible in binoculars, and NGC 6744, a beautiful spiral galaxy with a short central bar, best seen in photographs. And lastly, we have Octans, and you definitely know who made this one up. Octans contains the south pole of the sky. Unlike the northern hemisphere, there's no bright pole star in the southern sky. The closest visible star to the south celestial pole is Sigma Octantis, but it is very faint. Octans was introduced by Nicolas Louis de Lacaille. I'm not going to say it one more time. It represents a navigation instrument known as an octant, the forerunner of the sextant. Right, and that is that. That is every single constellation you can find in the sky. So that will be it for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope you have a very good night.